Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I am not in my normal location. If you're watching this video instead of just listening, I am in Indiana traveling, visiting my wife's family, which means I have been in enemy territory for games 4, 5, and 6 of the NBA Finals, watching my Thunder hopefully take care of business after the release of this episode, and we'll win game 6. Not been too bad. I've not gotten any fist fights or anything here in Indiana wearing my OKC gear. We all went to Costco the other day, like all of us, like kids all in the gear. Got a few looks, but no one tried to fight us, so that's good. Anyway, I wanted to hit a few things before getting to the main thing I want to talk about, which is the Israel-Iran stuff. That seems pretty pertinent. It seems like it's going to matter in the long run. But I wanted to get through a few things, mostly being the Minnesota assassinations, the political assassinations going on there, the ICE raids, and sort of all the drama around there, and Trump's sort of incoherent, flip-flopping immigration policy that seems to be going all over the place. Just want to briefly hit those things before getting to the Israel-Iran stuff. So let's talk about the Minnesota thing first. Don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but if you're not aware what happened in Minnesota, you had a guy going around dressed as a police officer, knocking on, so far what we know is the people he had targeted were state legislators in the Minnesota state legislature. And so he killed one woman and her husband, and then shot another legislator and their spouse. About 70 targets on a sort of manifesto that they found in his car, and there was a manhunt for like 36 hours for this guy. They finally found him and arrested him. He'll be tried, obviously, for that. And the reason I think this is an important story is because it's just another political violent situation where we have people murdering people for political reasons exclusively. And this has been a year where this is significantly ramped up. Just in the past year, we had 2 attempts on Donald Trump's life, one of which only didn't succeed because Trump turned his head slightly. That's a pretty close call. We have recently, in the last 2 months, there's been 3 anti-Semitic attacks, one of which was firebombing the sitting governor of Josh Shapiro's home with his family inside on Passover. So sort of political and religious targeting there, both at the same time. Then we have, just various other political violence. We've got the unrest, I guess we'd call it, in LA over the ICE raids, which we'll get to the ICE stuff in a second, where, we're excusing sometimes on the left violence that comes in the form of burning property, smashing, grabbing, looting, all this kind of stuff, throwing rocks at cops, things like that. So we've had like an escalation of violence. It feels like we've had, the United Healthcare CEO assassinated. Obviously, that was one that got a lot of cheers from one side. And so the reason I want to bring this up is because I think what's really important is that to me, it's going to be pretty obvious that the motivation for these assassinations in Minnesota are going to come from the right. So far, everyone he targeted was a Democrat. So there's obviously some evidence that that's where this is heading. And I think it's important that, specifically, I think one of the problems with the violence increasing is because neither side will denounce the violence on their side. So again, it's a little crazy to me that we've had 3 clearly from the left anti-Semitic attacks in the last 2 months, and I would call that a pattern. I would call that a trend, and yet we don't hear a lot about that in the media. And I think it's because it kind of hurts their narrative when people on their side are violently attacking Jews. And so we don't hear a lot about that. And then similarly on the right, it's like, we've just all but erased January 6th as a problematic thing on the right. Most people have all sorts of excuses for it, none of which are saying violence is bad and this is not the kind of behavior we should encourage. And so to me, there's that side of it where you don't necessarily call out the bad behavior. And then there's the part I talked about with like the United Healthcare CEO where it's openly celebrated. Or you're seeing that sometimes with the anti-Semitic attacks. So far, I'm not in the corners of the internet that are full of people that celebrate these kind of things, but they are celebrated. So that's a problem. And so if it looks like it comes from the right, I'm definitely going to also call it out. I think it's worth calling out all the political violence, but I think this stuff would maybe start calming down a little bit if the left policed their side and the right policed their side when we had violent people acting out on these kind of things. And what specifically concerns me the most lately is that in all three of the anti-Semitic attacks, it doesn't appear that there was I'm not saying mental illness couldn't have caused a thing, but that's generally where we go with this, is we say, oh, you should stop using violent political rhetoric because it could influence one crazy person to take action, and because they're not differentiating between the sort of political rhetoric and making that actionable. And the reason I think that we're slipping past that is because, by all indications, these Minnesota assassinations were very well planned out. The guy had a security vehicle. He had flashing lights. He was dressed up like a cop. He wore a mask. Very well planned out. Same thing with the Colorado anti-Semitic attack, which, I mean, he was using flamethrowers, sort of makeshift flamethrower, and Molotov cocktails, throwing them at actual Holocaust survivors. You know, well planned out. He dressed like a gardener so he could get closer to the action. So these are not like just crazy people. I mean, I do think that Trump's assassination attempt, that guy was certainly maybe mentally not stable, but it also doesn't appear that he was falling into a clear ideology. I think this was just someone that wanted to be infamous. And one problem with that is that we give them that attention sometimes that they seek by plastering these kind of events all over the news. So I think that there's two things that we can solve this by. I think one is policing our own side. And so that's what I'm doing in this case of the Minnesota assassinations. Is it seems like it's coming from the right, so I'm going to call it out coming from the right. I think that's important to do. The second thing is that I think the media has a little part in this, and to not give the people the notoriety that they're desiring by doing these things. There's a reason, and I've talked about this before, there's a reason we don't show people attempting to jump off a bridge to commit suicide on the news, is because we've realized that creates an incentive and a sort of social contagion that causes more people to threaten to jump off of bridges to either get on TV or whatever. It's the reason why, I mean, this is a more innocent situation, but if you notice, you don't see anyone running on a sports field anymore on television. The cameras cut away from that immediately if they have it caught at all. They will not talk about it. They will not give that person the notoriety that they're desiring by running onto a sports field, for example. And that's a really easy example of a what you would maybe call a harmless behavior. It's just delaying the game, but no one's getting hurt or anything. But they've realized that if we show these people on TV, it encourages more of it. And so they've scaled back that. And this is not a First Amendment thing. There's not a law that says you can't show a guy running on the football field, but it's a good sort of behavioral science way of going, look, if we don't show it, it encourages people, like, they're not going to get to be on TV if they don't show them on TV, right? So it discourages people from doing that. We do this with suicides as well. The media is very careful about how they talk about suicides for want of trying to prevent more suicides from happening, as mentioned, the jumping off the bridge kind of situation, but even when people are successful, the way they talk about it. And the reason they do that, just as a quick tangent, is like Robin Williams, when he died, we kind of threw some of those rules out of the window because we were also shocked about how, you know, this beloved person had killed themselves, and they talked about too many of the details, and they kind of skirted some of those rules that they had made for themselves. And we saw a 10% increase in attempted suicides by asphyxiation, which is what Robin Williams killed himself using, and in the month following that media coverage. So we can see that there's a real effect here. And yet somehow the media has not caught on that they also have the same effect when we're talking about things like, you know, political violence or these kind of things where we're giving them the notoriety they want. We're reading their manifestos on the air. We're putting their pictures on the air. We are talking at length about what their motivation was. And I think that we've got to stop doing some of that. I think at the point that we're stopping trying to figure out like how to prevent it from happening again, I think that we've got to police ourselves in the media a little bit better. So I don't like to say people's names that do this sort of political violence stuff, because I think it gives them just a little bit of that notoriety that I don't want to give them. I'm not going to put their pictures on this thing. I'm not going to put any pictures up today because I'm just not in my normal studio. But these are just things that I think people need to pay more attention to. And it's clearly ramped up in the last year. And I think the rhetoric coming from politicians is causing part of that. You know, when the greatest threat to Donald Trump is not a foreign enemy, but he claims it's the enemy within, it's the left, it's the progressive left. That seems a little inappropriate to me. I realize it's just political rhetoric and it's just being bombastic, sort of because that's what you have to do now in politics. But I think it's detrimental to the health of our country. And I think this political violence continues to ramp up, and that's a problem. So that's all I'll say about that. But sort of transitioning from that to the political violence of burning self-driving cars. Want to talk briefly about the ICE stuff. Not so much about the LA riots, or not really riots. I mean, I wouldn't even call them that. It's unrest. There's some people that are taking advantage of the situation, looting. Obviously, there were some violent people that started this thing. I really want to talk about the policy, though, around it, just briefly, because Donald Trump is waffling back and forth wildly on this stuff the last week or so. There's a basic problem with the Trump administration in that he came into it saying he wanted to deport 1 million illegal immigrants in the first year he was in office. The reason that's problematic is not because you can't arrest illegal aliens here. You can. It's absolutely the federal government's right to arrest people for crimes that we have on the books, that we say we have a certain process for coming here, and if you don't follow that process, we can arrest you and deport you. And now Donald Trump is doing that in some ways that I don't like. He's trying to get around having to use the courts as much by implementing the Alien and Sedition Act, and which I think is unnecessary in this situation. We are not at war with Venezuelan gangs. Venezuela is not trying to invade our country. This is not Japan attacking Pearl Harbor in the 1940s. This is not any of those kind of situations. So I don't think that's an appropriate use of constitutional authority. And so we can talk about the details and have disagreements there. However, just plain fact, it is absolutely not illegal. It's not wrong. I mean, you can talk about the tactics, like I said, but the federal government has a right to enforce immigration laws. They're in fact the only people that can enforce immigration laws, because immigration, unlike a lot of federalists, I'm certainly a federalist guy, I'm a states' right guy, but you don't have to be I'm a states' rights guy, without a doubt, but states don't have authority over immigration law. Only the federal government does. There's certain things that the federal government does have complete control over, and that would be immigration, our borders, and that's just the way it's structured. It makes sense, right? Because you can't have like I'm in Indiana right now, or in Oklahoma. We're not border states, but it wouldn't make sense for every border state to control their part of the border. Like, you want federal government to be able to do this. So in all of this, the real problem is that, I say problem, Donald Trump succeeded, his Trump administration succeeded in basically shutting down the border, because that was executive order ability. There wasn't a need to pass anything through Congress. I do wish we would actually get congressional legislation with immigration reform. That'd be a nice thing to have. Trump torpedoed that, though, during the last year of Biden's administration, because he wanted it as a campaign thing. Okay, so the problem has been that because he's so successfully shut down the border, Obama and Biden, you're going to hear a stat a lot of times that says, and I've said this too, that Donald Trump is on pace to deport fewer people than Obama or Biden did in his first year in office. Or at least this is kind of weird because it's obviously Trump's second time in office, but within basically the first year of an administration. And that's because that sounds like Trump's not deporting people. And it's sort of true, except that most of Obama and Biden's deportations happened at the border. These were people that were apprehended as they crossed the border illegally, and we turned them around and sent them back. That counts as a deportation. There are so few people coming across the border. Keep in mind that it was at its peak in 2023, I believe. Under Joe Biden, we had hundreds of thousands of border crossings a month, sometimes at its peak. That dropped pretty well from June of 2024 to December. It was dropping every month because Biden had miraculously undone some of the things that he claimed he couldn't undo, because he realized it was a campaign issue for him and the Democrats, and started undoing some of the lax border policies that he'd implemented at the start of his term. But even from the December to January numbers, just so like at the end of the transition of Biden leaving and Trump coming in, the numbers of people coming across the border dropped by 90-something% from just December. And that wasn't even at its peak. So basically no one's coming across the border illegally because they realize it's not going to be beneficial to them. And some of that is just Trump's posturing, and some of that is the actual executive orders that he signed. So either way, huge decrease at the border, which means if hundreds of people aren't coming across the border, there's a huge group of people that don't get to deport right there. And that's so easy to deport those people. I say so easy. At least you have federal enforcement at a single border that you are then, as you catch people, sending them back. That's pretty easy as far as deportation goes. Trump doesn't get any of those numbers because he succeeded at stopping people from coming across the border in the first place. So he's got to find that number of 1 million people to deport somewhere else, and which means you've got to send agents out into the country. So you've got to send them into cities, and that's what Trump is focused on, the administration, which makes sense because if you send resources to a city, there's chances like you're going to get more more arrest numbers in cities just based on the population density. So problem with that has been that Donald Trump is trying to send people into cities, and then those cities don't want to comply. So LA is like, well, we don't want to do this, and we don't think you have the right to do this. And let me be totally clear. It is absolutely ICE's job and their duty and their legal prerogative to arrest and deport illegal immigrants. And there are, like I said, all sorts of tactics that I would disagree with the Trump administration, even legal authorities that they're sort of trying to claim, and ways they're trying to skirt the systems and deport people without due process. I'm not for any of that kind of stuff, but like at its basic level, the federal government should be able to enforce immigration laws, and people in LA were preventing them from doing so. So I think that Trump's going to be within his legal authority to send the National Guard in to protect federal property and to protect those federal agents and let them do their jobs. Again, all sorts of legal stipulations of, I don't love the fact that he's trying to send the Marines in. There's all sorts of problems with it. But really more interesting part to me is that Trump last week, after some of these raids and stuff, figured out, someone got in his ear and kind of told him, hey, this is actually kind of hurting some of your voters. And so he kind of came out and said, well, we need these illegal immigrant labor for things like farms and hospitality, which is interesting that he's in the hospitality business with Trump hotels and golf courses and stuff. And I guess the restaurants are close enough to that, and farming. Obviously, farmers largely supported him in both of his elections. And so, he's like, well, never mind. We're not going to go after farmers. Now, to me, I don't like that, because I feel like if you're going to say that we are against illegal immigration and that illegal aliens are taking the jobs of Americans that would otherwise have these, and they're artificially lowering wages, then why would you not go after farms? I think there's a tricky situation here where Donald Trump and Republicans in general don't want to admit when their industries are using illegal labor for these kind of situations, where they want to either they can't fill those with American jobs, or they're using that illegal labor as there are some benefits to that for an employer. They might not have to pay them as well as they would American workers. They also have a situation where they kind of have them, they have these people that they could call immigration enforcement and send them out of the country. So they have like a uncomfortable amount of pressure of power over these illegal immigrants that do want to come here to work, obviously. But then there's also that side of it where it goes, well, I mean, like, would Americans take these farming jobs? There's no evidence that they want those jobs. So the whole point of being that I don't like the selective enforcement of it. I don't like saying, well, because farms are generally in red states and those are my constituents, I don't want to upset those people. And so I'm not going to go after illegal immigrants on those farms, but I am going to go after illegal immigrants that work in wherever. I mean, I guess a restaurant in a blue city is okay, but they're not going to go after. So anyway, there's been this flip-flopping back and forth, and there's been fights obviously within the administration, because the more really sort of very strict legal immigration enforcement kind of stuff on the Trump side are going, no. And so he's waffled all the way back to, never mind, we are going to go after farms and restaurants and stuff, but we're starting in blue cities. That's where we're going, because that's where the majority of these people are, in these sanctuary cities. But here's the thing. What's the difference in a sanctuary city and Donald Trump saying we're not going to go after your farm in a red state? How is that not a sanctuary job, right? So I think there's just wild inconsistencies on how we're thinking about this and how we're talking about this. And here's the thing. There's a really simple solution to all of this. All you have to do is what conservatives have been saying, do this for years, for as long as I've been around. I remember people talking about this, especially in the sort of internet age. It's like a thing called E-Verify, where all you have to do is make sure that people can't hire people that are not eligible to work in the United States, whether that means they overstayed their visa or whether that means they crossed the border illegally and they have no sort of green card to work here. This is a way you can do that. And you can tie that to the IRS. You can tie that to all sorts of things. It'd be very simple to say, look, if you're a U.S. employer and you're going to hire people, and you could obviously do this for certain size businesses, put a certain employee threshold that people would have to deal with this, and that would just nip it. It would stop the flow of people coming here illegally to get jobs that are illegal in the sense that they're either not getting paid what they should or they are taking jobs away from Americans. So if you really wanted to solve this problem, if Donald Trump really wanted to solve illegal immigration, he would do E-Verify. Here's the problem, though. Donald Trump's not getting any credit for those border crossings because they aren't happening. So he's not getting those deportations. He's also not getting any self-deportations, which they're encouraging, unless they go through the app specifically, because there's a sort of app situation that the Trump administration has set up where it says, hey, you can basically register on this thing and self-deport, and will still allow you to then come back into the country within X amount of time legally. Whereas if you don't do that, we won't let you back in the country. First of all, if you didn't use that system and just leave the country, we're not going to know that you were ever here potentially. And so you could still come back the legal way and we wouldn't know. So I'm not sure how many people are using this system. I don't have those numbers. And I don't know that we've seen any numbers from that. I'd have to look at that. But the point is, there's a lot of people that are probably self-deporting. There's probably a lot of people, and if they're not using that app and that specific registration thing, the government has no idea, and they're not getting the credit for those numbers. And so there's two things happening here. Is that one, I think the Trump administration is doing a bad job at saying that those things are victories. We kind of just forgot about the border because we don't see people pouring across it. But that is a success that we don't see people pouring across it. And so that should be something that they talk more about, in my opinion. And they should talk more about getting estimated numbers of how many people are self-deporting, because those should be considered victories, in the sense that if you can get people to self-deport, there's two great reasons that is helpful. One, you don't have to have any sort of law enforcement. There's no money tied to that. There's no funding that's tied to that. There's no chance of things escalating or getting out of hand or using dubious legal theories. If you say basically, hey, we're possibly coming after you at the places that you work. That's why they're doing these raids at places like Home Depot, where like for Hispanic people specifically will show up and wait around for someone to come be like, hey, I need like 10 guys to help me do something. And they'll pick them up and they'll pay them cash. And so they're actively raiding these places that will discourage the behavior of those illegal immigrants thinking they can get jobs and work at those places. So it can be successful without the numbers that are attached to it. But it's wholly incoherent because Trump can't keep his mind made up for a day even. Like I said, we've gone from we're not going to do raids on farms and restaurants and hospitality places to we are going to do them to we're going to start in blue cities. And so it's still trying to make this left versus right thing. But the truth is this is happening in red states. It's happening in blue states. It's happening in all sorts of industries, some of which are very Trump supporting and some of which are not very Trump supporting. And it would be nice if we had an immigration policy that was uniform across the board, whether you were a Trump supporter or whether you were a Democrat or whether you worked in a certain farming industry or hospitality industry. Shouldn't matter. If we are, as a country, clearly in 2024, people were voting for stopping the flow of illegal migrants. And Donald Trump did that. So check mark. Good job. He did the border thing, I think, pretty well. Now there's also quite a bit of support for deporting illegal immigrants, and wildly across the board, people are saying, yeah, deport people that are criminals or have violent histories or any kind of thing like that. Those people should go first. The problem is the Trump administration is running out of those people too. And so now they're just trying to get the numbers up. And so they are deporting people that maybe otherwise we would say as Americans are not our priority to get out of the country. If someone's been here for 20 years illegally, I'm not saying that they did the right thing or that we should give them citizenship, but I'm less worried about the person that's been here working for 20 years, has a family, their kids are citizens. I'm less concerned about that person than I am the gang member from Venezuela that ran out of people to rob because there's nothing worth robbing in Venezuela. And so they moved here instead to run their gangs here. I'm much more concerned about getting those people out first. So the Trump administration needs to get more coherent on this. They need to be better about bragging about their victories. And I think that we got to get Congress involved in an actually like fully comprehensive immigration reform, but that's not going to happen. So let's move on to Israel and Iran. So I think that's the most important thing that's going on right now. If you haven't heard, Israel started attacking Iran last Thursday evening. And so this is like a week ago. And we're a little bit in the fog of war stuff, but they've had a lot of victories so far. They've destroyed a lot of military places. They've apparently have complete air superiority. They cannot get, they're literally flying over Tehran without any risk of being shot down. That's how badly they have decapitated Iran's defensive capabilities against airstrikes coming from Israel. They apparently had drone bases set up inside of Iran. They had where they were launching strike drones from inside Iran. So, I mean, this is a wildly, as we learn more about it, I think we're going to learn, just like we did, like the pager attacks and sort of taking out of Hezbollah and some of their leadership and taking out of, some specific leadership positions in Iranian military. But now they've also taken out several generals. They've taken out several leadership. They've taken out several of the nuclear scientists that were working on the nuclear stuff. And this is all because Israel believes that Iran was very close to building nuclear weapons. And so we're going to talk about that in just one second. But so far, these strikes have been pretty comprehensive, and Israel seems to be winning. And they're taking care of most of the stuff that Iran has sent back to Israel, and they kind of bombarded them with a bunch of missiles, but those have tapered off in the last several days, and it's probably because they're either running out, or they don't have the capabilities, or they don't have the structure in military leadership well enough to continue to strike Israel. But the point is, in all of this, is Israel's doing better than I think people thought they could in this kind of situation. They clearly planned well ahead. So far, the United States has not aided in, from what we know, anything other than intelligence. They got heads up that this was coming, but they did not. They're not actively participating. They're not sending their own bombers in or helping with any sort of thing other than, I think, intelligence. So, why is this a big deal? And what do we know and what do we not know? I think this is a situation where we don't know everything yet. There are disputes, and this will make everyone flash back to 2003. There are disputes about what Iran's capabilities are for nuclear weapons and what their intentions are with nuclear weapons. Israel claims that they are actively pursuing a nuclear bomb and have nearly enough enriched uranium to weapons grade to make about 10 nuclear weapons. And the, what is it called? The international... hold on, I've got it written down here because I always forget the thing. The IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. So this is the international agency that does policing of nuclear energy specifically. And so what they've been doing is inspecting nuclear facilities inside of Iran and working with them to say, because Iran's claim is that they're only using this for nuclear energy, that they have no interest in building a bomb, that they've abandoned since 2003 their want of a nuclear weapon. Now, is there any reason to believe Iran? No, I don't believe so. So I don't think we should take Iran at their word. However, I do think there should be evidence, as we've obviously been in a situation before with Iraq, going back to 2003, where we were claiming there were weapons of mass destruction, and I think the really thing that people forget about 2003 is that everyone thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. No one was really claiming that he didn't. It was just we had difference of opinions of what we should do about that. But generally, the whole world's intelligence was that he had them, and that's because Saddam Hussein wanted people to believe that he had them. We've since learned that, we never found any, so it seems like that was a ruse. And so that's sort of a tricky situation if the country is trying to pretend they have weapons of mass destruction, and still, I think we should follow the evidence. So what is the evidence? Obviously, I don't have that intelligence, but we've had Tulsi Gabbard, our director of national intelligence, say before Congress within the last few months that Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and there's no evidence that they're trying to build nuclear weapons. But the IAEA says that they've enriched uranium to 60%, which is just a basically short jump to 90% to get to weapons grade uranium, and that they have more than any country their size would need for nuclear facilities for energy. So I put that a little bit in the column of they're trying to build weapons, because why else would you be trying to enrich uranium to a degree where it'd be weapons grade, and so much more than you would need to for just nuclear energy? Seems like there might be an ulterior motive, right? Then the other problem is that There's a huge difference between having the uranium to build a nuclear weapon and being able to have a delivery system that could put that on a, intercontinental ballistic missile, for example, that would be able to fire from Iran and hit a country like Israel or the United States or any of these other kind of places, because that's a whole different kind of technology that needs to be thing. And so far, we don't have, allegedly, I mean, I've not seen any evidence that they have built that kind of delivery system. But keep in mind, you don't have to have that kind of delivery system to set off a dirty bomb, for example. That's just like a traditional sort of bomb with nuclear material inside of it that basically kills people with the radiation and stuff. It's not that it necessarily has the nuclear blast kind of thing. It's like you're killing more people with the sort of radiation and the radioactive material. And you also could create a bomb that doesn't have to be delivered via a missile, and they could deliver it via one of their terrorist proxies or something. So there are different levels of this, but we know they have enriched uranium to the point where they are weeks away from being able to have weapons grade uranium. I don't necessarily love the idea of Iran having any sort of weapons grade uranium. The other problem is that IAEA can't get into certain facilities because Iran won't let them inspect certain facilities, even though they're supposed to be obligated to do so. So the IAEA says specifically, this is one of their spokesperson, also said that the agency could not provide assurance that the Iranian nuclear program was exclusively peaceful because Iran was not complying with its investigation into man-made uranium particles discovered by inspectors at 3 undeclared nuclear sites. So the IAEA is saying, hey, they're at least doing shady stuff because they're not letting us inspect this stuff, and we have found nuclear material at places that we didn't think it should be. So, but then again, I'm not in the intelligence, so I don't know, like, are they actually pursuing the weapons? I think that's important to understand, but I get why Israel doesn't want to take the chance. They go, this is a country, Iran, that wants to wipe us off the map. This has been consistent throughout Israel's history, going back to 1948 when they were founded. They were attacked by multiple countries surrounding them in 1948, in 1967, in 1973. Those are just the actual declared wars from other states. Then we've had, just a barrage of terrorist proxies attacking them since, culminating in the October 7th attacks that kind of launched this retaliation from Israel in Gaza against Hezbollah, against Hamas, against the Houthis, against Iran. And so Israel's kind of saying, look, these people are trying to kill us. We're not willing to let them get a nuclear weapon. And I think that is fair to say. I think we would feel the same way if Mexico wanted nuclear weapons and also were stating that they wanted to wipe us off the map. I think we would try to do everything we could to prevent them from getting it. I don't think we would trust them to have enriched uranium and just trust that, yeah, they're probably just using that for nuclear energy. So I totally get where Israel's coming from on this. And the next sort of follow-up question that I think is worth asking is, why should we care about this? Because that's a thing I think you kind of hear a lot about. I think there are two sides to this, and this would go way too long if I tried to get into the nitty-gritty of all the Israel stuff. I need to have some more guests on and do some more in-depth conversations. But just at its basic level, you've got sort of an anti-Zionist crowd that would say that they're just against the state of Israel and their methods, and they call them genocidal and stuff. And I think that's more of a progressive left problem. You have sort of an isolationist version of the right now that doesn't want to get involved in anyone else's conflicts and would say we just don't need, it's like Iran having a nuclear weapon does not concern us, and so we shouldn't get involved. I think you have pro-Israel people for lots of different reasons. You have people that are for religious reasons, that are Jews here or Christians here, that feel a sort of like a religious affiliation with the state of Israel. You have people that just say, look, they're a democracy in an area where they are surrounded by people that hate them, and it's good for Western democracies like us and Britain and Australia and these other people to support democracies where in areas where they're trying to be smothered. And that's why we support Ukraine, for example, or that's why we support Israel. So there's all sorts of reasons behind this. But I think the most important thing that Jonah Goldberg pointed out in his newsletter is that, look, the reason Israel's always coming up is because they're constantly being attacked by their neighbors. They're being there's all sorts of people that want to attack them. And I just mentioned all these wars that have happened. And these were all started by people outside of Israel trying to attack Israel. So Israel they are attacked very often. And so therefore it's in the news very often. Because, yeah, we have to come to their defense because people keep attacking them. And it's not that Israel's doing these things offensively. I mean, yes, this attack on Iran was an offensive step in the sense that they started this. Although I would say that's not really a fair assessment, because even though Iran didn't initially attack them, Iran was funding Hezbollah and Hamas, and certainly think, knew about October 7th and was fine with that. This is what they are paying these organizations to do. And that's the reason they fund them, is to attack Israel and to be a stateless thing. But since then, remember, Iran attacked Israel first. Iran fired missiles into Israel after all they had done is assassinated a couple of higher ups in Iranian thing, which you can say is a state of war, but they were also just retaliating against Hamas and against Hezbollah. And some of those rocket fires from Iran directly into Israel that we swatted down, most of those, we helped Israel, even surrounding countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, some of these other countries, Egypt, helped say, okay, we're going to kind of stop this. So Iran doesn't have a lot of friends, and Israel keeps getting attacked. And so I think some of this is just the nature of when you've got a country that's constantly being attacked, they're going to be in the news all the time, and they're going to have to take some sort of action there. So we can have a lot of differing opinions on where is that line. Like, I certainly don't want to send American troops into Ukraine or into any of the Israel-Iran kind of conflict. That is not, I think, in our interest. But is it in our interest to share intelligence? Is it in our interest to share weaponry with them? The big problem in Iran is that there's a nuclear facility that is 300 feet buried underground, very fortified, that from what we know and understand, Israel does not have the capability to take it out because they don't have any bunker busting bombs like we do, where you could drop this thing, it basically burrows all the way down and then blows up on like a timed release kind of thing. They have some smaller weapons that can do some things like that, but they basically have not. They've targeted this site's electricity, they've targeted some other stuff, but they have not. It does not appear that they've destroyed it. I find it very hard to believe that Israel would go into this conflict with all this planned intelligence and all these attacks and this highly sophisticated drone operations inside of Israel, instead of Iran, taking out leadership, knowing exactly where all these leaders are staying and having that intelligence to be able to take them out strategically. I find it hard to believe they would do all that and not have a plan for taking out the main nuclear enrichment facility. They might not have the capability with like one gigantic bunker buster bomb, but maybe they have some sort of other plan. And maybe the goal was like, hey, we don't have to implement that yet because it's very dangerous or it's going to cost lives, in the hopes that, as I draw my AirPod, in the hopes that what would happen is that we would come to their aid and drop our gigantic 30,000-pound bunker buster on this place and take it out. But I find it hard to believe that they don't have a plan to do so without us. I think that they have decided that they don't have to wait for our approval on everything, that they can go ahead with these kinds of things. And thank God they did. I mean, remember that Biden was like, don't go after Hezbollah, don't go into Rafah. Like at every turn, the Biden administration was like, don't do this, Israel. And then they would do it and they would have a great victory. So I'm sort of glad Israel's not listening to us. I think we are way too, I understand why we're cautious because it affects us directly. But I'm all for Israel going after Iran militarily, because here's the thing. We can't have it two ways. On the right specifically is who I'm talking about, because on the right, there's sort of two arguments going on right now, I feel like. And one side is very isolationist, this sort of new populist, nationalist, neo-isolationist. They don't want to be involved in anyone else's conflicts anywhere else. And one of their complaints is that for the last 80 years, we've been our military complex, our sort of strength has been letting Europe not spend money on defense and relying on us to potentially come to their aid if any sort of military action is necessary. And basically, we are subsidizing their welfare programs. And I think that's fair to say. So that's one side that complains about these freeloaders that have been freeloading off of our military strength. But then for those same people to complain that Israel's not doing that, and that Israel is basically saying, hey, we're going to go at this on our own. We actually don't have to have your support. We will take care of ourselves whether anyone helps us or not. And we complain about that too. We kind of go like, oh no, you need our permission to do so, or we've got to stop helping you. And sort of vilifying them for doing what we've said we want Europe to do, is be more military, spend more of their budget on military, make sure they're fortified against these sort of threats from Russia and China and North Korea and Iran and sort of the bad actors in the regions. And so you can't really have it both ways, in my opinion. You can't say you want to get out of all these conflicts, but at the same time, if those people want to take care of things themselves, that we're also against that. You can't really be the police and the bully, and I don't know. You got to decide where we want to be. And I think it's really worth having those discussions. I think that we should be having more of these discussions. And the truth is, most Americans just don't care about foreign policy. I think in the last election, it was 4% people had it on their list of things that they cared about going into the presidential election. So only 4% of the country thinks foreign policy is important. And I think that's why we get bad foreign policy sometimes, and sort of bipolar foreign policy, is because politicians are trying to, put their finger up in the wind and figure out which way the people are going. And we are really fickle. Before the Afghanistan withdrawal, something like 70% of people said we should withdraw from Afghanistan. They agreed with the fact that we should get out of there. But then when it was a disastrous thing that, we get 13 Marines killed in it, hundreds of Afghans get killed in the process. People are clinging to planes. It looked like us leaving Saigon. It was a disaster. And the American public turned on Joe Biden, and his approval rating never improved from that, because polling is not a reliable way to see what people think about a situation, because you cannot get the nuance of world geopolitical events in a poll. You can't just ask that question, should we get out of Afghanistan? Yes, but not that way, is what they were basically saying afterwards. It's like, yeah, we wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but not in that embarrassing way where we just abandon our allies and the Taliban takes over the entire country within a matter of days, and they're killing people that worked with us. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with that. And so we're fickle on foreign policy because we're not very educated on it. But we should pay attention to these things. They matter. And I think it does matter. And it's worth having a rigorous debate about whether we should we use weapons? Should we give weapons? Should we sell weapons to Israel? And this goes across the board. This goes with Taiwan. This goes with Ukraine. We can have these conversations, and I think it's worth having them. I think we are a little too reflexive sometimes and just think that Iraq is the example for all wars and all conflicts that we could possibly get into, specifically in the Middle East. And I just don't think that that's a fair analog. I don't think that we can always revert to the mistakes that we made in Iraq and say that those will forever happen again. It is important to look back and learn from those, but I don't think so far we're making those kind of mistakes. But someone's going to make the decision. Forget the fact that we can have an argument about whether the president can order a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities without congressional approval. I would prefer that kind of thing to happen with congressional approval, because I want to have the buy-in of the people's representatives and it not just be one person at the top. I think that's just a smarter way to do it. It spreads that risk around a little bit. And so, gosh, it's kind of bug on me. So I think we should take this stuff very seriously. We should have the arguments, but there's a lot of bad faith arguments going on right now. And frankly, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of anti-Israel stuff that goes on. And without really ever admitting that they are a country that is being constantly attacked by their surrounding neighbors. And I don't think we were really considering what that might be like. So anyway, it's a problem. And Donald Trump is kind of waffling back and forth. And there's alleged, Tucker Carlson's come out against him. The comedian Dave Smith, who is kind of one of those famous Joe Rogan just asking questions guy, but has a lot of anti-Semitism. It seems to run one way. It's very anti-Israel, very anti-interventionist, but I think it's a naive way to look at the world, to think that we can just sit back and do nothing and hope that everyone else in the world does things the way that we would want them to. And it just doesn't work like that. And I think we are potentially throwing away 80 years of, I'm not saying we haven't made mistakes. We've done plenty of bad things in those 80 years. We've done a lot of good things too, though. And I think we're at the risk on the right specifically of throwing all that away. But then you look at the polls and you go that, you know what, it's not like most people support Israel. Most people support us supporting democracies like Ukraine, like Israel, that are trying to fight for their existence. Most people support that kind of stuff. Now, some people disagree with tactics. Some people disagree with the leadership in Israel. I think it's totally fair to call out the things specifically in Israel that you don't like about Netanyahu or the government. I mean, there's plenty of people inside of Israel that are doing that. So I'm not saying I'm going to label you an anti-Semite just because you are against some action that Israel does. That's childish. But if you're always against Israel, no matter what, whether they're like, if you were calling out Israel on October 8th, before they had even retaliated for the October 7th attacks, if you were saying Israel's the bad guy in that situation, then yeah, I think you are anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. I think you are anti-Jew at that point. I don't think there's any other way. If you're rooting for the people that say they want to wipe Jews off the face of the earth, I think that you are also anti-Semitic. But I don't think that's everyone. And this is worth having a conversation about. It's worth saying, where's the line? Like I said, is it troops? Is it bombs? Is it intelligence? Like, what's the line? Where do we want to support people like Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel, these small democracies that I think we benefit from having exist in the world, because I think that we should want more democracies. I think we should want more of them, and we should defend the ones that are being attacked. I think that that's a good thing that America does. I think it's something that we did well during the Cold War, and I think that we've kind of forgotten. People my age and younger don't know a world really pre the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so we had this period of time that we've kind of forgotten that there are people that want to there are bad actors out there, and we can't pretend that they don't exist. And I think at our detriment, if it's to our detriment if we do pretend that they don't exist. If we just pretend Iran is not going to get a nuclear weapon, or they're not pursuing one, and then all of a sudden they have one, that's a much bigger problem for us and for the entire region of the Middle East, when you've got a bad actor like that. So all of these things are worth having discussions about. We're early into this thing. We're only a week into this Israel attack on Iran, and this will change probably before I even release this in just a moment. But I think the most important thing for me that has been a struggle for me, so I assume it's a struggle for you, is what information do you believe? Because the media has biases. Obviously, there are fights within the Trump administration going on right now, where you've got the more dovish. I know Tucker Carlson's not in the Trump administration, but he certainly, at least at points, has had Donald Trump's ear. I mean, very closely connected to him. Tulsi Gabbard, that sort of dovish side of it. Now, Tulsi Gabbard's video last week saying that we're closer to nuclear holocaust than ever makes a little bit more sense now that we know she was frozen out of the Camp David summit that was talking about this Israel attack, and she was not invited to it. The director of national intelligence, Donald Trump, is kind of saying he doesn't believe her intelligence, saying that Iran's not pursuing a nuclear weapon. So she's been sort of pushed out. So there's this infighting going on, but in the Trump administration right now, between the sort of doves and the hawks and various other degrees of that. And that's spilling out into the media. So you're going to see some people that are sympathetic to the dove side. They're going to tell you the dove things. And you're going to see the stuff sympathetic to the hawk side that's going to try to convince the Trump administration and you that, yeah, we should bomb Iran and just wipe them off the face of the earth. There's sort of that hawkish side too. And it's hard to find the information of what's real. And part of the problem here is that we don't have access as citizens, and the media and people don't have access to the intelligence, that what we really know about those facilities. What do we really know about Israel's weapon capabilities? What do we have weapon capability wise? What do we know about the intelligence on the ground? There's all sorts of reasons that we can't know that, right? That can't be public knowledge. But there are people that are going to manipulate any kind of thing that comes out and say, oh yeah, they definitely already have a nuclear weapon, or they're definitely pursuing one. There's other people who are saying they're definitely not pursuing one. Obviously, both of those people cannot be correct at the same time. And so it's, pay attention to what you pay attention to. And my advice on that is just read a lot of different stuff. And I specifically like reading some stuff that's outside of the US too, when it comes to these kind of things, because when there's fighting within the Trump administration on what to do on this thing, you can't even trust a left versus right kind of paradigm, because you're going to see stuff on the right now, depending on where you go read and who you specifically read or what channels you watch. You're going to get different information even on each side of the aisle. And so it's just not super reliable right now. And there's so much sort of fog of war stuff happening too, that sometimes we don't have the reliable information of even what's happening on the ground. But I think this is going to matter pretty long term. Israel's been very successful in the last couple of years in these strikes, in their intelligence, in their operations on the ground. They've been wildly successful. Honestly, I sort of trust their military intelligence better than ours right now in some ways. And so we'll see what happens. But anyway, that is it for me. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you being here. If you could do one thing for me, rate the podcast wherever you're listening to it. If you can do two things for me, go follow me on YouTube, where I'm doing shorter, like 15-minute videos. And those are sort of topical. And I'm trying to do more of those, at least one of those a week. So go check that out. And other than that, I will catch you next time, when hopefully the Oklahoma City Thunder are the NBA champions.